It's the holidays, and, every family has those strange stories, right? Almost too strange to believe.
Right.
Well, imagine a story so baffling it becomes a national mystery. A Christmas Eve fire and a disappearance that still haunts us to this day. That's what we're diving into today. The story of the Sodder children.
It's a case that has perplexed investigators and armchair detectives for decades now. True puzzle, and the pieces never seem to quite fit.
Exactly. So to set the scene, it's 1945, Fayetteville, West Virginia. The Sodders were Italian immigrants, and they had built a good life for themselves and their 10 children. Christmas Eve, everyone's asleep. Seemingly an ordinary night, but as we know, that's not how this story goes.
Yeah, what's so fascinating about this case is that the fire itself wasn't even the start of the mystery. There were some pretty peculiar events even before the flames erupted.
Right. Just after 1:00 a.m., the mother, Jenny Sodder, she's awakened by a phone call.
Oh, wow.
And it's a woman's voice, laughing, asking for someone the family doesn't even know. It strikes her as odd, but she dismisses it, it's probably just a prank call.
Right.
But in hindsight, it becomes one of many threads that unraveled this story. Was it a random prank call, or was it something more? A deliberate attempt to distract or unsettle the family.
Yeah.
And it doesn't stop there. Shortly after that call, Jenny hears a thud on the roof and then a rolling sound.
Ooh.
And at first, she thinks it's just something falling from the roof, maybe, but then she realizes the house is on fire.
Oh my gosh. Imagine that terror. Waking up in the middle of the night to your home engulfed in flames, especially on Christmas Eve, a night meant for joy and celebration.
A parent's worst nightmare.
Absolutely.
The father, George, Jenny, and 4 of their children, they managed to escape. But 5 children are still trapped inside. Maurice, he was 14. Martha, 12. Louis was 9. Jenny was 8, and Betty was 5.
5 children unaccounted for. It's just heartbreaking to consider the chaos and the desperation that the Sodder family must have felt in those moments.
And George tries everything he can to get back to his children. But the doors are locked. The flames are intense. The ladder that they usually kept outside is gone. He even tries to start both of his trucks to reach the upper floors. But inexplicably, neither of them will start.
It's just, this is where those earlier details, the phone call, the sound on the roof, become even more unsettling. Like, were these just unfortunate coincidences? Or are we seeing signs of something more sinister at play? Was the fire intentionally set? Were those escape routes deliberately sabotaged? It's a question that will continue to linger throughout our dive into this case.
And it's a truly harrowing scene to picture. The family's helpless, watching their home burn, knowing that 5 of their children are trapped inside. Firefighters eventually arrive. But by then, the house has been reduced to ashes. But that's not the end of the story.
Not at all. It's only the beginning. Because when they sift through the ashes, they find no trace of the 5 missing children.
No remains. But 5 children were in there? How is that even possible?
That's the question that has fueled this mystery for over 75 years. The fire chief at the time attributed it to the intensity of the blaze, claiming that the children's bodies were completely incinerated, leaving no trace. The official ruling, accidental fire caused by faulty wiring, case closed.
But the Sodders, driven by a parent's intuition and grief, they refuse to accept that explanation.
Right.
They begin their own investigation, even conducting their own experiments. They burn animal bones in intense fires and discover that, contrary to the fire chief's claim, bone fragments remain.
And their skepticism is understandable. While intense heat can cause significant damage to bone, complete incineration, especially of 5 bodies, is highly unusual, particularly in a house fire of this scale.
And then there are the other unsettling details. The missing ladder, which was later found in a nearby embankment, the phone line that was cut, not burned, and George's trucks that mysteriously wouldn't start. These details paint a very different picture than a simple accidental fire.
Absolutely. It's like each new piece of information just raises more questions than it answers. We're starting to see the first cracks in the official narrative, and the seeds of doubt are firmly planted.
And for the Sodders, those doubts fueled a relentless pursuit of the truth. They couldn't accept that their children simply vanished without a trace. They refused to let this become just another unsolved mystery.
And their determination is remarkable. In the face of unimaginable loss, they chose to fight for answers, embarking on a journey that would consume their lives and leave an indelible mark on the history of unsolved mysteries.
Their journey takes them down such a winding path, filled with dead ends, glimmers of hope, and a relentless search for answers. And as we delve deeper into this case, We'll uncover those twists and turns, examine the evidence, explore the theories, and grapple with the question that has haunted this family for generations. What truly happened to the Sodder children on that fateful Christmas Eve? So the Sodders, unwilling to accept the official explanation, they take matters into their own hands. They hire private investigators, they consult with psychics, they even reach out to the FBI, hoping for a fresh perspective.
Their determination is admirable, but it also kind of speaks to the deep mistrust that they developed toward the local authorities. They clearly felt that the initial investigation was inadequate, that something was being overlooked.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the fire itself that fueled their suspicions. They started to recall incidents that had happened leading up to that Christmas Eve that just added to their unease.
You're talking about the threats that George received prior to the fire.
Exactly. There was a disgruntled former employee who'd been fired for theft, and he had actually openly threatened George. And as we mentioned earlier, George was a vocal critic of Mussolini, which had kind of created some friction within the Italian community in Fayetteville.
Right. Yeah, it's important to consider those pre-existing tensions.
Yeah.
While they don't directly link to the fire, they do create a context of potential motives, right? Individuals who might have harbored some resentment toward the family.
And the Sodders felt like these threats were being ignored by local law enforcement. They were convinced that there was more to this fire than just faulty wiring. But let's talk about some of the leads that they received, because this is where the case takes a truly bizarre turn.
Yeah, the leads are a fascinating aspect of this case. They offer these kind of glimpses of hope, but often lead to more questions, more dead ends.
Yeah, one of the earliest tips came from a waitress in Charleston, West Virginia. She claimed that she had served breakfast to all 5 Sodder children a few days after the fire.
Wow. A sighting of the children alive and well after the fire would certainly challenge that official narrative. However, eyewitness accounts can be unreliable, especially in, emotionally charged situations. It's possible that the waitress was mistaken or misremembering certain details.
And then there's this letter that they received from a woman in St. Louis. She claimed that she'd seen the children at a hotel there. This suggests they may have been taken out of state.
Yeah, multiple sightings across state lines raise the possibility of a planned abduction. If true, it adds another layer of complexity to the case, and it points towards, individuals with resources and connections, right? Capable of orchestrating such an operation.
But perhaps the most tantalizing lead arrived in 1968. The Sodders receive an envelope in the mail. It contains a photograph of a young man, maybe in his mid-20s, and the resemblance to their son, Louis, is striking.
Oh my goodness. Imagine the surge of emotions that they must have felt seeing that photograph. After all those years, could it be their son?
It's almost cruel, isn't it? To receive a glimmer of hope like that, only to be left with even more questions than you had before. And it gets even creepier. On the back of the photo, there's a handwritten note. Louis Sodder. I love Brother Frankie. I little boys. A90132 or 35.
A cryptic message. Never been definitively decoded. Some speculate it's a coded message, perhaps revealing the children's location. Others believe it's a taunt, a way for the perpetrator to keep the family on edge.
The photo and the message were like a whisper from the void, a sign that maybe, just maybe, their children were still out there.
Yeah, and it really highlights the psychological toll this mystery took on the family. Every potential lead, every unexplained detail would have reignited their hope and their grief, probably in equal measure.
And then there's this incident with the ballet troupe in New York City. Years later, George sees a magazine photo of a dancer, and she looks remarkably like his daughter, Betty. He travels to the school where this troupe is based, and he demands to see her, but the school refuses.
Another potential lead thwarted. It begs the question, was there a deliberate effort to keep the Sodders from learning the truth? Were there individuals or even organizations with something to hide?
The Sodders encountered those roadblocks repeatedly throughout their search. Now let's talk about the FBI's involvement, because that adds another layer of complexity to this story.
Yeah, the FBI's initial interest and then subsequent withdrawal from the case, it was a crucial turning point.
So the FBI was initially intrigued by the possibility of an interstate kidnapping. Multiple sightings in different states pointed to something more than just a local tragedy, but there was a catch.
They needed the local authorities to officially request their assistance.
And as you might have guessed, the Fayetteville police and fire departments refused to cooperate with the FBI.
Their resistance is puzzling. It certainly fueled the Sodders' suspicion that something was being concealed, that perhaps there was more to this case than local authorities were willing to acknowledge.
So the FBI, lacking that local jurisdiction, had to step back, leaving the Sodders feeling, I'm sure, frustrated and abandoned.
Yeah, and this bureaucratic impasse underscores the complexities of jurisdictional boundaries, even in a case with potential national implications.
A heartbreaking example of how those who are caught in the middle of a tragedy can be let down by the very systems designed to protect them. But even with the FBI sidelined, the Sodders did not give up. In 1949, they organized a new excavation of their former home site.
Years after the fire, as a testament to their persistence, they were still clinging to the hope of finding some evidence, some clue that would shed light on their children's disappearance.
And during that excavation, they discover a few small human bone fragments. Imagine their hope. Finally, some physical evidence. They send these fragments to a specialist at the Smithsonian for analysis.
This seems like a major turning point. Could these fragments finally provide the answers that the Sodders had so desperately sought?
Well, it seems like a huge breakthrough at the time, but the analysis of those bone fragments revealed a new layer of mystery.
Yeah, the specialist determined that the bones belonged to an individual older than any of the Sodder children, likely between the ages of 16 and 22. Even more perplexing, there was no indication of fire damage.
So, not the children and not even from the fire. It just feels like every time the Sodders got close to an answer, it just slipped away.
It's incredibly frustrating, isn't it? And the report suggested that the bones likely came from the soil that was used to, fill in the foundation after the fire. Remember, George had bulldozed the property at some point.
Adding yet another bizarre twist to this already tangled tale, did this discovery further erode the official conclusion of an accidental fire?
It certainly cast more doubt on the initial investigation. The presence of those bones, it raised questions about the thoroughness of that initial search and the validity of that, completely incinerated explanation.
And the Sodders weren't the only ones questioning the official narrative. In 1950, the case gained attention at the state level with 2 hearings held by the West Virginia legislature.
This marks a pretty significant shift. The case was no longer confined to local authorities. It was now a matter of public record and scrutiny.
But despite the growing doubts and the Sodders' tireless advocacy, the case ultimately hit another dead end. Governor Oki L. Patterson and the state police superintendent, they declare the case hopeless, officially closing it at the state level.
A devastating blow to the Sodder family. They had poured their hearts and souls into finding the truth.
It's a tragic illustration of how, even with public pressure, mounting questions, sometimes those official channels just reach an impasse. The Sodder children's disappearance became a cold case, but the family never gave up hope. George passed away in 1969. Jenny in 1989, their quest for answers unresolved.
Just imagine carrying the weight of that unanswered question for so many years. The not knowing, the lack of closure. It must have been an incredible burden to bear.
The surviving Sodder children have continued their parents' search. The case remains unsolved to this day. A haunting reminder of that Christmas Eve tragedy and a testament to the enduring power of those family bonds. But we can't leave this deep dive without at least exploring the various theories that attempt to explain what happened.
Right, there's a multitude of theories out there, each with its own supporters and detractors, some more plausible than others, but they all try to weave a narrative through the limited facts and the many unanswered questions.
Okay, let's start with the organized crime theory. Some believe that the mafia, seeking revenge for George's outspoken criticism of Mussolini, maybe they kidnapped the children.
It's a chilling possibility. Organized crime was undeniably powerful in that era, but the question is, would they resort to such a brutal act against a family in a small West Virginia town?
Yeah, it does seem extreme, but revenge can be a powerful motivator. Then there's the child trafficking theory. Were the Sodder children taken and sold into a new life? Their identities erased.
Child trafficking was, and sadly remains, a grim reality. The lack of standardized records and the often secretive nature of adoptions in that era, it does make this theory a plausible, albeit horrifying scenario. And this theory could explain the multiple sightings of the children in different locations.
And if the children were taken, was the fire a tragic accident or a deliberate cover-up to mask an abduction?
That's one of the most perplexing aspects of this case. The cut phone line, the missing ladder, the trucks that wouldn't start. Were these just unfortunate coincidences, or were they carefully orchestrated actions to hinder escape and delay response? These details do suggest that the fire might have been intentionally set, but by whom and for what purpose, it remains a mystery.
And then there's the government agent theory. It's a bit more out there, but it persists nonetheless. Some speculate that the children were taken as part of some clandestine government operation, or perhaps even retribution for George's political views.
While this theory lacks any concrete evidence, it does tap into a Cultural fascination, really, with government conspiracies, with these covert activities. It's a reminder that sometimes the most outlandish theories, they emerge from a desire to find order and explanation in the face of the unknown.
So what do you think? Was it a tragic accident, a planned abduction, or something even more sinister?
Honestly, after exploring all the details and considering the various theories, I don't have a definitive answer. And that's perhaps what makes the Sodder case so compelling. It's a mystery that defies easy explanation. It's like a puzzle with missing pieces that may never be found.
Well, this deep dive hasn't provided a neat conclusion, but it has given us a deeper understanding of the complexities of this case and the profound impact that it had on the Sodder family.
Yeah. And it's also highlighted the importance of critical thinking, of questioning official narratives and really acknowledging the limitations of what we can truly know, right? Sometimes the most enduring mysteries, they leave us with more questions than answers.
The story of the Sodder children is a reminder that even in the, seemingly ordinary moments of life, darkness can lurk, and the truth can remain elusive.
Their disappearance, it serves as this haunting reminder of the fragility of life, the enduring power of family, and the tireless pursuit of answers, even when hope seems lost.
It's a story that stays with you long after you've heard it. And maybe, just maybe, someone listening to this deep dive holds a piece of the puzzle, a clue that could finally bring closure to this decades-old mystery.
If you have any information, no matter how seemingly insignificant, please reach out. Sometimes the smallest detail can make all the difference in solving a cold case.
And that wraps up our deep dive into the Sodder children disappearance. We hope you found it insightful, if not a little unsettling.
Remember, keep exploring, keep questioning, and never underestimate the power of a curious mind.
Until next time, stay curious.